I've read the stories you turned in last Friday, and I enjoyed it. Lots of good writing. Many of you have had experiences that really should be recorded in story. Well, all of you do. Part of the art of, I think, living a good life is getting better and better at figuring out how to turn the events of your life into story. I did notice some common traits, though, that I think with a little bit of work, your stories could be much better. I mean, more interesting for the reader, but I also think more meaningful for you. And it's just the stuff I talked about in my earlier videos on writing for story. How do you turn your life into story? Um, I would say most of you didn't go far enough towards story. You stayed in explanatory and exposition, um, which is kind of a way of leaving the story out. The story is the actual events in an actual world with real people who say real things. And if you just summarize that and said, well, we fought all the time and move on, but you don't show me even one fight, I really am not there with you as a reader. I really only have the vaguest idea of what you're talking about. And I already know what vague ideas of fights are like. What I want from you is your story, the one only you have experienced. Only you were in that particular place at that particular time with that particular person when those particular words were said. That's what you need to get to. Um, that's what's interesting about you. The themes, I mean, the fact that things happen to you and you're happy or sad, well, welcome to the human race. That's the case for all of us. You don't need to tell us about that stuff. We already know it. What we want to know is, but what was it like for you? What was that day like that you remember so vividly? Recreate it. And by recreating it, I mean, let me experience it the same way you did through my five senses. What do I see? What do I hear? What do I smell? What do I taste? What do I feel on my skin? Uh, I think what you'll find when you get to writing at that level, in a sense, it's easier. In many senses, it's harder, but I think it's a lot more fun. You're closer to what I call the real work. One way of getting there is to talk about writing dialogue, putting dialogue in there. Partly the reason is you can't get to dialogue without getting into the real world of the story, the actual places, the actual people. And there's a lot of other reasons for using dialogue. Dialogue is really a powerful writing technique. Especially it's vital if you're writing for story. So much information is communicated so quickly and efficiently and vividly with dialogue. Mary Jane Parker, Mom Bella, get in here this instant. Boom. It gives you a lot of information about the character, about the mood of the scene. The reader picks it up instantly. You don't need to explain anything. You don't need to go on and tell me that Mom was dismayed or upset with Mary Jane. Why bother telling me what's obvious? You want to use dialogue to make things clear so you don't need to explain them. Um, just the basics of dialogue. Um, you can't just stick dialogue in there so that you have dialogue. Dialogue, like everything else in your story, has to have a purpose. I mean, there must be some reason you're giving us this scene. Dialogue should advance the story, meaning we learn something about the characters, or we learn something about the situation, or we get some background information. There's all sorts of things you can use dialogue for, but do it for something, and keep it concise, keep it tight. Don't use 10 words to do the work of five. Real conversation is limp and overloaded with syllables and lots of chit chat. Don't put that in. Dialogue gives the impression of being real conversation, but it's much tighter, much more brisk. Um, don't use a lot of complete sentences when you're writing dialogue because people don't talk that way. make it flow, read it out loud. It should sound effortless and spontaneous. It should sound really natural. And in real life, people make all kinds of boring chit chat and small talk. That's not what you do with dialogue. That's if you just put it in there so you can have a character talking, uh, the reader will be trying to figure out what's going on. And if nothing is going on, you'll lose the reader pretty quickly. The other thing to think about is that everybody looks different, acts different, think differently, and we don't all sound the same. All characters don't talk a lot alike. One of the arts of fiction writing, if you read a guy like Charles Dickens, he was a master at bringing a character into a scene very quickly, having the way he speaks become characteristic of him, so you'd recognize him anywhere. And so he could bring those characters to life, and you learned a lot about the character's nature, their character. um, Pay attention to good writing. Pay attention to the two samples of stories, a short story and an excerpt from Jane Welch's novel that I put on the website this week. They won't take you very long to read them, but read them like a writer, trying to figure out, well, how do I do this stuff? You can use dialogue uh, to cover kind of the same ground you might cover with exposition, but it's just a lot more interesting and richer if you do it in dialogue. Okay, so here's the scene as straight exposition. Sharing a room with her sister wasn't always fun. Christy was tired of always cleaning up after her sister Ashley. Just because they shared a room, doesn't mean they had to share the mess. Ashley was always leaving dirty dishes on her desk, and there were always dirty clothes under the bed. Christy tried to talk to Ashley about cleaning up the mess, but somehow talking didn't help. Anytime you're saying somebody was always doing this or always doing that, quite often writers do that instead of giving us the one scene that would bring it vividly. Instead of just saying that, try using dialogue, like in the right-hand column. Sharing a room with her sister wasn't always fun. Christy was tired of always having to clean up their room. Ashley, you've left your clothes on the floor again. I'm not picking them up for you this time, said Christy. I'm sorry, Christy. I didn't mean to be a slob, joked Ashley. I just don't notice the mess, really. I guess it just doesn't bother me. Well, it bothers me. You know it does, said Christy. I'll try harder, I guess, sighed Ashley. But I can't promise anything. Neatness just isn't my thing. Well, now you have a lot more vivid sense of both the characters and what the problem is with that little bit of dialogue than you had with just the exposition. Um, to get good at this, it's a matter of listening to how people talk. And you really need to have a good ear for natural speech patterns to be good at this, but anyone can get good at it. Pay attention to the expressions people use. Everyday conversation has a kind of music, and it's a music that varies from person to person. Just be more awake to it. Um, it's most helpful to develop your ear by actually paying attention to the way people really do talk. And as I said, dialogue sort of imitates real speech, but it's really not like real speech. Albert Hitchcock said that a good story was life with the dull parts taken out. And that's kind of what dialogue is. Good dialogue is a lot like ordinary human speech with all the filler words and the unessential stuff and the dead ends and the ers and the ums taken out. All that stuff doesn't move the story forward, doesn't contribute to the plot. So keep it tighter and briefer than the language you actually do hear around you. And don't overload the reader. This is actually one of the reasons for shifting to dialogue at all. One of the characteristics of novice writers is they don't develop stuff enough. And so they can really overload you with information before you can process it, like a typical fifth grader's story. Uh, they'll have a couple meet and fall in love, and they lived together happily, and then they had three kids, and then all the kids grew up, and left home and then one of them died. That will happen in 3 or 4 sentences. Well, okay, but that's not how storytelling really works, is it? Um, Pay close attention to the information you get bit by bit in Hills Like White Elephants, the Ernest Hemingway story I put up. If you read that story carefully, you will more and more and more, you will get to understand what the man in the story is like and what the woman in the story is like. It'll get more and more clear what's really going on in the story. They aren't really talking about the things they're talking about, and that's the way human speech really is. They talk about the hills that look like white elephants, but that's small talk. We use small talk because we don't quite know how to get to the real talk, what we're really thinking about. Um, but what you don't want to do is just use some dialogue to just dump a ton of information on somebody, a bunch of background, the backstory, what we did last year, how we got here. You can use dialogue to put in that kind of information, but you need to do a little bit, a little here, a little there. Take it easy on the reader. And break the dialogue up with action. I mean, generally, if you pay attention to movies or stories, usually when people are having a conversation, normally they're also doing something else. Somebody's changing a tire, somebody's washing the dishes, weeding a garden, feeding the chickens. And so that you get a conversation, and then you get something like he set the bag in the corner and brushed the dust off his overalls, and then he says something else. And it gets kind of fun writing like this. You also find that it goes fairly fast in terms of filling up a page. Uh, but the important thing is that the writing comes alive a lot more for the reader and for yourself. If you're recording something important that happened in your life, you'll want it to be as good as it can. So for yourself, when you read it 20 years from now, or when your grandkids or your great grandkids read it, make it good. It's your life. You might as well tell the story as well as it can be told. Um, and I already said this, have the speakers doing something. It gives you more opportunities, describing their gestures, talking about the setting. All of that can help you create the mood and the tone that you want at that point in the story. Um, and so this is just a sample of dialogue. I put the 2 stories up, so I don't think I'm going to take the time to read this right now. And then dialogue tags. I see websites that are offering thesaurus 150 words you can use instead of said. But go look at a good novelist. You'll see that almost always they do use said. You don't even notice said after a while. And if you're always trying to find some louder, bigger word, he blurted, he screamed, he shrieked, he laughed. It gets really distracting and it's not helpful. Said is usually enough. And if you use the other tools of dialogue, one of the most important ones is every time you change speakers, start a new paragraph. Even if the person only said one word, they said "oh," and then you change back to the other speaker, start a new paragraph. What that does is it fills up the page quickly for sure, but it also makes it easy to keep track of who's speaking, which is what you want. And if you pay attention to Hemingway's Hills Like White Elephants again, one of the things you'll notice is he quits using any dialogue tags at all. He's pushing the edge. He's seeing how much he can get away with. He always wanted to know how much he could leave out and still have a story that worked. So he leaves out most of the dialogue tags. You probably won't want to go quite that far. And I've noticed reading that story with students that quite often students do get confused about who is speaking because you have to keep track. In other words, he's making you work probably harder than you want to make your readers work. But the main point is don't overdo the dialogue tags. Just say he said, she said. That will work fine. Um, what do we do now? Shadows from the single candle flickered on Heather's face. It masked the basement smell with green apple. She rolled her eyes at me. Nothing, Christy. Just wait. I sighed. I was sick of waiting. My arms and my butt were starting to hurt. I drummed my fingers impatiently on the plastic pointer thingy. Stop it, Heather hissed. You'll make them mad. Make who mad? The spirits, stupid. Right. The spirits. Like I really believe the spirits are going to talk to us on a piece of Parker Brothers cardboard. Now, isn't that a lot more interesting than saying we played a board game together and argued with each other a little bit? You don't need to explain very much to the writers if you tell the story accurately and precisely and in enough detail. Um, Bad writers have a tendency to rely on profanity and stereotypes, like some things that I just don't allow in writing because I've seen it too often. Is a speakable pause and light a cigarette. I'll quit with the cigarettes and coffee. Put them something somewhere more interesting and have them do something different that you weren't expecting. And um, and profanity and slang, they just use it when they want to show people really angry, or they want to use it with because they want to make the writing big and loud. It doesn't work. I mean, nothing shocks anybody anymore. It's just kind of unimaginative. You see it in Hollywood. I mean, I sometimes I think Hollywood no longer knows how to write a good insult because they just rely on dropping f-bombs and that sort of easy, uninteresting things. I just put in an insult from the movie Casablanca, which, if you want to see well done storytelling, I could do a whole class on what you can learn about telling stories from that film Casablanca. Lots of people say it's the best Hollywood movie ever made. But at one point, one character says to Rick Blaine, the hero, he says, "You detest me, don't you, Rick?" And Rick answers, "I probably would if I gave you any thought." Brilliantly done insult, way more interesting than dropping the F bomb. Um, the rules for punctuating dialogue can be confusing, and usually I'd say everybody needs help in getting it right at the beginning. Take some time to learn the basics. Does the comma go inside the quote or outside the quote? If you introduce a quote with a dialogue tag, he said, "Bring me the water." Is there a comma after said? Don't guess at that stuff. It's easy to get the rules on a place like the OWL, OWL, Online Writing Lab from Purdue University. Just Google punctuating quotes OWL, and you'll end up at the Purdue site. Or what I do if when I was learning this, if I didn't have a style guide handy and the internet was not handy, find a good novel with a lot of dialogue in it and just open it and look for the kind of situation you're trying to punctuate and see what the pros did. You will need to pay attention to it, and you will need to figure it out, and you probably will need help. None of that's a problem. Just do it. Good writing is just an awful lot of taking pains. A lot of it's tedious, but things that are easy to write are usually hard to read. Uh, the writer does a lot of work to make things seem simple and graceful and easy to the reader, and it's worth it. Um, this I've already said. Start a new paragraph every time you change speakers. Let's see. And I'll probably end with this. Just how much you can learn without explanatory, without exposition, without you being the voiceover narrator and talking and talking and talking. Just tell the story and then trust the story. John hovered in the doorway, wondering if he needed to wait for a hostess or just sit down at the first table he could find. "Oh, miss," he said, trying to catch the uniformed blonde's eye. She ignored him. "Oh, miss," he tried again. "Yes?" John fought back an urge to salute. "What is it?" she snapped, looking at his fingernails. "I was wondering, nothing. Sorry. I'll go somewhere else." Now you know what happened without anybody needing to explain it to you. So there it is. All you need to do this week is to revise or rewrite or start over if you want to, but most of you don't need to. The story you already did. As I said, all of them have good stuff in them, things worth working on. So just take the work, put in the work it needs to take your story a step closer to real story, and then proofread meticulously. I mean, there's no reason in a final draft to get misspelled words or punctuation errors. Read it, reread it, give it to somebody if you're not a very good editor. I use Grammarly, and I'm pretty good with grammar, but it surprises me how many mistakes I make. Grammarly, you can find it online. There's a free version of it. You can just copy your page and paste it into it, and it'll do a grammar check. And it's I mean, Microsoft Word had that wizard for a long time that would pretend to check grammar, but it wasn't really a wizard. It was kind of a moron, and it missed most things, and half of what it told you, it was wrong. You may have been right. Anyway, the reading isn't very long that I've asked you to do. You should have quite a lot of time to work on the writing, and I hope you take the time. I'm looking forward to reading what you do this week. We'll see you.